All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you all for being here. My name is Jonathan. I work for Guidewell Education, aka Applerouth, and I'll be talking to you all about the ACT today. Um, before we begin, wanted to let everybody know there's a Q&A function, should be at the bottom of your screen. If it's not there, if you click the little More menu, there should be a Q&A in there. There'll be some time at the end for for me to answer any questions that y'all have. So that's there. Please do use it. Let me go ahead and share what I got here. Okay. Make sure everybody can. Okay, it's not that one. All right. There we go. All right. That's what we want. Thank you very much. Let me, yeah. Okay, so as previously advertised, my name is Jonathan. I am a test prep tutor for Guidewell Education. Today, I'm going to talk about the ACT, what's on it, how it works, what it looks like, what it feels like. The goal of today is to kind of give a general overview of the test and, a little bit of everything that a student would need to know. This is going to include a couple of practice questions that are pulled from official practice exams. Uh, I I recommend any students who are on the call to follow along with those. I recommend any non-students, any educators or parents to also follow along with those. There's not gonna be a real quiz at the end or anything, but I think it's important for anybody who's supporting a student to understand what the test is actually looking for and the kind of thinking that the test is trying to test for lack of a better word. So that's what we have in store for us today. First of all, what to expect. Um, at a basic level, it should be known by everybody that the scores range from a 1 to a 36. The composite score is an average of your English, your math, and your reading scores. So this is unlike the SAT, which adds the scores together. This one is an average, which doesn't mean anything much other than increasing your score uh, is a matter of, 1 or 2 points of increase is actually very impressive, a very difficult thing to do. Um, and of course, on the SAT, it's quite easy to just, bump up 10 points, 20 points on a test. So it sort of feels different to work through the prep. But the scores are equivalent and accepted by all colleges. It used to be there was a required science section, which was included in the composite score. The science section is now optional, and it is not included in the composite. So the composite is just the average of those first three. Science section is now just ancillary. Um, we recommend at this point that students who are in doubt should opt for the science section. This new version of the ACT, the enhanced ACT, is hasn't been around long enough for us to know exactly whether colleges really generally want the science section. Colleges haven't really made up their mind yet, so better safe than sorry. Use the science, get the science section just in case, basically, is our recommendation. Test can be taken digitally or with paper. And of course, it's accepted all the same places that the SAT is. And in general, it should be known that the tests are very similar. Much is made of the nuances between the two, but overall, most students score the same or very, very close on these two tests when they just try them out. So a lot of times the decision of which one to really invest time in comes down to which one the student enjoyed more or disliked less, more accurate, I think. Okay, so in terms of structure, the English section is 50 questions and they have 35 minutes to take it. Math is 45 questions, they have 50 minutes to take it. Reading is 36 questions for 40 minutes, and science, the optional one, 40 questions, 40 minutes. All of these are now shorter than they were before, right? The older version of ACT was much longer, gave you a bit more time overall, but less time per question. So the test now gives more time per question and has fewer questions and is overall shorter than it was back when I took it, certainly. That's the basics. In terms of content, um, English is going to be broken down into three basic categories. Production of writing, these are things like choosing the appropriate transition word. Should this word at the beginning of the sentence be however, or should it be therefore, or should it be something else? Placement is things like, all right, I have this paragraph with 5 sentences. What's the appropriate order for these sentences to go in? Which one sort of produces the best flow? So there is some science to it, but it's not really the same as, does this subject agree with this verb? It's not quite as concrete as some of your grammar questions. Which brings me to the next category, conventions of standard English, grammar, punctuation, is this a comma splice or is it not a comma splice? Things like that. Knowledge of language is a bit more like what is your command of the English language, right? How good of a journalist or copywriter or novelist would you be? Do you understand things like concision, removing redundancies? Do you understand tone? Can you keep tone consistent across a paragraph or a passage? And that is the smallest category. That's the fewest questions on English. Most students, we have found that most students struggle most with conventions of standard English. That's kind of the stickiest one. A lot of times, production of writing and knowledge of language, you can develop a kind of intuition for those much more easily than you can for conventions of standard English. For math, math on the ACT is very broad. Lots of different question types, a lot of questions generally. But there's actually more question types and more topics than there are questions. So there's lots of studying that needs to be done that actually won't appear on every single test just because there's so many different things that are being tested. But they all fall, pretty consistently into these categories. So, about a sixth to a fifth of it is algebra. Same amount for functions, for geometry, slightly fewer for statistics and number and quantity. Number and quantity is things like I have some equation with a couple of variables in it, and I tell you that, okay, A and B, the two variables, are even integers. Which of the following must be true about C? Does C have to be even? Does it have to be odd? Can it be this? So it's sort of command, does the student have a strong command of the sort of very basic sort of early understandings of what numbers do, especially what integers do. Are they even? Are they odd? Are they prime? Are they squares? Things like that. And those are deceptively tricky. Oh dear, I'm so sorry. And finally, integrating essential skills. This is sort of a broader category, and it's sort of the largest one. But integrating essential skills is sort of using basic. Can you use your understanding of basic concepts to solve more complex problems? That's sort of the gist of integrating essential skills. So the SAT, by comparison, is way heavier on algebra and advanced math, which most people, when they look at advanced math, they would say this is just algebra 2 and maybe a dash of pre-cal. That's like 70% of the test, just those two on the SAT. The ACT, much broader, much more even. So if you are not big on algebra and algebra-like math, ACT might be better for you. You can't escape it completely, but there's a lot less of it than you get on the alternative. Okay, a couple of bonus tips. The questions are going to start very easy and they're going to get tougher, which most people already know, but they tend to forget when they're taking the test because that changes how you approach the question. If you know that it's an early question and it's really easy, then you know that you probably don't have to spend that much time on it. But you also know that if it looks kind of weird, if it looks unusual, and you're working through it and it's taking you 5 minutes and you're not getting anywhere, you are probably overthinking it, right? Question 5 should not be taking you that long. If it's taking you a long time, there's probably a really simple shortcut that you missed. And once you know to look for that, it gets easier. Um, Conversely, if you're towards the end of the set, if you're on problem, 41 or 42, and something looks super easy, don't breeze past it. There's probably something tricky going on there. All the questions are multiple choice. If you are taking the online ACT, you get the built-in Desmos calculator, which is very, very useful. Um, Sometimes students love their own calculator very much. I get that. I have yet to see any calculator or a student who is fluent enough in their own calculator to hold a candle to what you can do in Desmos. Desmos is really, really powerful, really helpful for this test specifically. Um, and of course, please do use scratch paper. There are no bonus points on the test for doing impressive mental math. Um, and usually the students who rely on mental math will just get stuff wrong. You will have a higher error rate if you do things in your head and you don't write them down. So even if you are extremely brilliant, please do use scratch paper because you are not infallible. Um, all right, reading is our next core composite section. Breaks down into three categories. Key ideas and details. These are things like what is the main idea of this paragraph or this passage? What does the passage or paragraph say about this one specific thing? That's more of a detail question. Craft and structure, a lot of these are vocab questions. Which of these synonyms is most appropriate to replace some word, or should we just leave it alone, leave the word that's already there? Um, and integrating knowledge and ideas, this is sort of the smallest section. But this is higher level. Can you compare passages? Can you make inferences about the perspective of the author, things like that. So requires a little bit of imagination, but you still want to find concrete evidence inside of the text to tell you what the conclusion ought to be. Reading is very, very practice heavy as a discipline, right? So if you are doing test prep, if you are trying to improve your score, you spend a lot of time going back to older concepts, learning about grammar, reviewing math that maybe you haven't done in a long time. For reading, there is a bit of that. Like you might need to study vocab, but a lot of it has to do with just practicing through a lot of these passages, just doing a lot of reading, answering a lot of questions, and when you miss something, try to figure out why. But there's not a lot of sort of base knowledge that it's asking you to know. It's more about do you have the verbal reasoning skills to answer questions like this intelligently? So very practice heavy, this one. Um, all right, and science, optional. So I'm going to go a little bit quickly here. Interpretation of data is, what does this chart say? Scientific investigation is sort of the next level higher than that. So not just what does this chart say, but what does the chart mean? Can you extrapolate? Can you tell me what is not on this chart, but is indicated by the chart? So if the line is going like this, do you understand that it's probably going to continue going like this and that it's going to be up here, next trial, for example. And then evaluation of models and inferences is sort of higher level than that, considering things like, is this model, is this data actually reflective of reality? Is there some problem with the methodology? How could the methodology be improved? Does this, if I wanted to make a conclusion that's sort of adjacent but not actually directly supported, what sort of data would I need? Things like that. Science is, again, like reading, it is more about your ability or it relies a lot on practicing. You want to be able to work through a lot of science passages if you are interested in getting better at it. There's some basic scientific knowledge that needs to be known, but not very much. It's, a quick review, excuse me, a quick review of things like simple machines, buoyancy, F equals ma, a little bit of chemistry, just knowing how a chemistry equation works. Um, that's about all the base knowledge that you need. Most of it is about your ability to reason scientifically. Okay, time for the fun part. Practice questions. Here we go. So I'm gonna show you the practice question, and I will give you 1 minute to try and solve it. And then I'm going to work through it, but I'm going to sort of think out loud, and I'm going to try to demonstrate the kind of thinking that the test is really looking for. So if you are following along, which I encourage everybody to do, although I will not be checking, I do encourage you to use a calculator and some scratch paper on the math ones. They won't all be math. We're going to try to cover a couple different things today. But without further ado, here we go. This is a reading question. I'm going to give us 1 minute to take a look, and that begins right now. All right, that is 1 minute. So you'll notice that on these vocab questions, the actual vocab words themselves are not terribly advanced. I don't want to make any super broad generalizations and say that everybody would know these, but for most high school students, they are going to know most of the words that are in your average question. There's going to be some that they don't, but in a question like this, skeptical, observant, critical, confident, I think most 16, 17-year-olds are going to know what those words mean. So it's not really a question of just of being able to recall definitions. It's about understanding the inferring the answer based on the evidence that's in the text. So in this case, you have to think a little bit in terms of parts of speech, or at least the function of the word in the sentence, even if the student is not able to recall the exact part of speech that's appropriate, just a basic understanding of the function of the word itself. So in this case, these are all adjectives that describe Jacob Lawrence, right? Painter Jacob Lawrence being something. And of course, I'm sure everybody on this call knows that that would make it an adjective, but it's not strictly necessary that you recall, the term adjective. Now, the way that you actually solve this is you look for what else is doing the same job as the word that is in the blank. So in this case, what else is describing Jacob Lawrence? Well, it says that he paid close attention to all the details of his neighborhood. And that's all we really need. That's the only description that we have of him other than whatever is in the blank. That's the match that we're looking for. So you're always looking for a match in these questions. You are looking for what is the thing that this blank is doing? What else in the text is doing the same thing as whatever is in the blank? Find that match. So which of these words means paying close attention to all the details? Of course, that would be observant. That is what we're looking for. That's the correct answer. So if you solved it that way, wonderful. If you didn't solve it that way, wonderful. That is the approach that I teach, that I think works most consistently for these kinds of problems. Some students, like to just solve things like this intuitively. That's great if your intuition's good enough to work every time. That's not something that's easy to sort of build up. So my sort of foolproof tutoring method is look for the job that the blank is doing and then look for what else is doing that job, and then find the matching term. So ironically, a lot of students will assume if they're not great at the vocab questions that what they need to do really is study vocab. And that's true for some students. There is a certain level of of basic vocab knowledge that is expected. And if you need to close that gap, that's what you need to do. It's fairly, labor and time intensive to work that way. A lot of students are better off practicing this process of like matching within the text and also making educated guesses about what the words actually mean if they don't know them. So being able to like identify Latin roots or consider similar words that might have, the same prefix or the same suffix and make an intelligent inference about what the word means at a very, rudimentary level. Like just being able to say, well, this is a negative word because it says un at the beginning or in or im. And therefore I know that it's not gonna be appropriate for this one. So, should you study vocab? Maybe. Not as often as you might think. All right, that's enough of vocab. We've got another one here. This one is a detail question. It's asking about what is said by a particular character. So another reading question. Give you all 1 minute to look through it. Okay, that's 1 minute. So for most of these key ideas and detailed questions, the thing that trips up students is they get distracted. This is asking about a really specific thing. It's just, what does the Lord Chancellor say? That's where we're going to find the answer. And there's a lot of text that does not do that, does not tell us that. Um, the student should still read the entire text, but have to stay focused on what is actually being asked. So you always read the question first. So in this one, I also read the question first. Based on text, how does the Lord Chancellor respond to the crowd? We also have this lovely little, I think it's called paratext, but it's this bit that's telling you is what the text is about. That's pretty helpful. A lot of times that's going to set some important context, so you should not skip that. I'm not going to read the entire thing aloud because that is not a good use of our time. But the student should read through the entire thing and see that the Lord Chancellor is saying, "What can it all mean?" He kept repeating, "I've never heard such shouting before at this time of morning and with such unanimity." So, uh, that's what he's expressing. If I look through the answer choices, it says he asks about the meaning of the crowd shouting. Now that is true. He does say what can it all mean. And it says even though he claims to know what the crowd wants. He does not. He does not claim to know what the crowd wants. That is nowhere in the text, so we can safely eliminate A. And that's sort of you want to be very, very strict, very pedantic about these kinds of questions, right? If a question is 1% wrong, then it's 100% wrong. He indicates a desire to speak to the crowd. I don't see any evidence that he indicates a desire to speak to the crowd. So Chancellor does not want that. The answer is not B. He expresses sympathy for the crowd's demands, even though the crowd's shouting annoys him. We don't see expressing sympathy for the crowd's demands. And we also don't see the crowd shouting annoys him. We might assume that just because he's in charge and everyone's yelling, and that's usually what annoys people like that. But it doesn't actually say that in the text. So C is eliminated. And you do want to make sure that you're watching those assumptions. Anything that you want to include in your answer needs to be directly justifiable in the text. You need to be able to go back in the text and say, here's where it says this thing. Um, he describes the crowd as being united. He does do that. He says with such unanimity, even though the crowd clearly appears otherwise. And if we go back a little bit, some are shouting bread and some are shouting taxes, and no one seemed to know what it was they really wanted. So the crowd does appear otherwise, and he does describe them as being united. So D is the answer. Another sort of hint that could help a student if they were having trouble with a question like this is that this is a Lewis Carroll satirical novel. So if you have any familiarity with Lewis Carroll, you know that he likes really absurd, kind of silly stories with a lot of contradictions. And this is sort of in keeping with the spirit of his writing. So that is yet another reason why you should always read that intro text. It's gonna a lot of times it's going to include a helpful hint like that. So a couple of paths to the correct answer in this one. Okay, moving right along. This one is about evaluating a claim. This is another kind of reading question. And I'll give you all 1 minute to read through it. Okay, that's 1 minute. So again, this is not exactly the same as a detail question, but the approach is similar. It is asking about the student's claim. So that is the thing that we want to stay focused on. As we're reading through it, we want to look for the student's claim. I'm going to read fairly quickly because I know that everybody has already read it because you were all following along because I asked you to. Born in 1891 to a Czechoslovakian family in the Andes Mountains, Martin Chamby is today considered to be one of the most renowned figures in Latin American photography. In a paper for an art history class, a student claims, here we go, student claims that Chamby's photographs have considerable ethnographic value. Okay, that's the claim, considerable ethnographic value. It elaborates by saying that he was able to capture diverse elements of Peruvian society. He represented his subjects with both dignity and authenticity. Okay, but the important thing really is considerable ethnographic value. That is the claim. The other details might be helpful, but we want to stay focused, right? Do not get distracted by all the text that isn't about the claim. The question is about the claim. That is the thing that we are going to be thinking about. A. Chambi took many commissioned portraits of wealthy Peruvians, but also produced hundreds of images, carefully documenting the people, sites, and customs of indigenous communities of the Andes. I think that would have considerable ethnographic value. And that's the thing that we're focusing on. So A looks very promising. We always look through all the answers, especially on reading and English questions, because there's always a bit of mushiness, a bit of flexibility, unlike math. So we do want to check everything, even though A looks very promising. Chamby's photographs demonstrate a high level of technical skill, as seen as in his strategic use of illumination to create dramatic light and shadow contrasts. Now, I'm not familiar with Martin Chamby, but he probably this is true. I have no reason to believe this isn't true. That he had a lot of technical skill and used light and shadow in creative ways, but that's not in here. It doesn't have anything to do with the student's claim. It is wrong. During his lifetime, Chambi was known and celebrated within and outside of his native Peru. His work was published in places like Argentina, Spain, and Mexico. This does kind of trip up a lot of students. They like this one because they think ethnographic value means that the photographs themselves are renowned across many ethnicities, um, like the Argentines and the Spanish and the Mexicans, as well as the Peruvians. But that is not what that means. That is not ethnography. Um, ethnographic means, recording, writing about ethnicity through photography in this case. So C is not what we're looking for. D, some peoples and places Chambi photographed had long been popular subjects for Peruvian photographers. Has nothing to do with ethnographic value. Not the correct answer. So our initial instinct of A is correct, but still important to read through everything because you never know. Um, all right, that's that one. If I'm going fast or if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the Q&A. There'll be time at the end for me to go back and talk about stuff. Here's a grammar one. Read very carefully. And I think that the key for a lot of these kinds of questions is to look at the differences between the answer choices and think about, what contexts would favor the key differences. I'll let you work out what that means in the next minute. Ready, set, begin. Okay, so what I recommend to my students for questions like this, which are, of course, it's, standard English conventions, but also specifically this one is what we call boundaries questions. So it's questions about punctuation and clauses. And we can tell because the answer choices are basically all the same words, but with different punctuation and different articles, right? So that makes it a boundaries question. And for all boundaries questions, and even some of the non-boundaries, standard English conventions questions, the best approach, the best first step is to identify the subject and main verb of all the sentences. In this case, we have one sentence, so that's nice and easy. And then identify all the clauses from there. And that's usually going to tell you most of what you need to know. So in this case, the Alvarez theory, comma, we have this whole descriptive parenthetical clause that doesn't need to be there. And then it says maintained. So theory is my subject, maintained is my verb. And everything after that, we're describing what it maintained and what the theory really was. And then it left unexplored the question of whether unrelated volcanic activity might have also contributed to the mass extinctions. So uh, if we had nothing else, if there was nothing in the blank, and then this would be a new independent clause, right? It left unexplored the question is itself an independent clause. So that means that if we went with something like D, we would have a comma splice, right? We would have I have another subject and another verb here. Um, and I cannot separate two independent clauses with just a comma. Nor can I separate two independent clauses with nothing at all, right? That would be a run-on sentence. So C and D are eliminated right away. The conjunction but does allow for an independent clause to come after it, but only if it has a comma as well. So B is the answer that we're looking for here. I want to do this whole independent clause, throughout, and then comma, but it left unexplored the question. That's fine. I'm allowed to do comma article to move from one independent clause to another. So that is why I always recommend identifying subjects and verbs and clauses, because most of the rules kind of depend on what's going on with the clauses. Um, with some of my students, I'll give them like a news article or something that's sort of topical, and have them just go through and identify all the subjects and verbs, all the clauses, just to build the habit. It should be instinctive. Um, all right. Okay. We've got another standard English one. This one has nothing to do with the clauses and everything to do with the adjectives. That's your little hint. All right, 1 minute, ready, set, begin. Okay. Now this kind of English question is called a misplaced modifier. And it's one of my favorites because it's not it's not very intuitive for most students because most people make this mistake in everyday speech. Um, so we know that it's a misplaced modifier, not just because I said so, but because the every answer choice is saying essentially the same thing, but the word order is different. So that means we're doing misplaced modifier. In this case, it says while exploring the Lutloon Cave on the Yucatan Peninsula, uh, blank that lived over 12,000 years ago. Okay, so because I know it's a misplaced modifier, because I looked at the answer choices and I see that they are saying the same thing but with a different word order, I know that the next thing that is said after this clause, right? This is a dependent clause. It is describing something, but it's describing something that is outside of the clause. So while exploring the cave on the Yucatan Peninsula, something was exploring the cave. What was exploring the cave? Was it tiny bones that were just exploring the cave? No. Was it mice that were exploring the cave? Maybe. Mice can explore caves, I suppose. But if you read through, it doesn't make a lot of sense on the other end. It doesn't make sense for the mice to be exploring and then also be recently discovered by this biologist. Um, and then it says that the biologist contained tiny bones and that the tiny bones lived over 12,000 years ago. That's no good. So B is out. Now, both C and D begin with the biologist and end with mice. Mice that lived over 12,000 years ago, biologist that was exploring the cave. Both of those make sense. So this appears to, both of these answers, C and D, appear to have the modified thing as close as possible to their corresponding modifying phrases, which is what we want. But the key difference, and this is one that comes up all the time on the test, is this is actually possessive. So it's not that the biologist is actually as close as possible to the modifying phrase, because this is not the biologist. This is an adjective that is describing something else as belonging to the biologist, right? Her recent discovery was not exploring the cave, right? A discovery can't explore a cave, but a person can. So D says that the person was exploring the cave and recently discovered these bones that belong to mice. So D is the answer here. This is like a very common sort of structure of like a like the Marx Brothers would make these kinds of jokes, like you know, covered in mustard and relish, I ate a hot dog, or I shot an elephant in my pajamas. How did the elephant get in my pajamas? Um, so it's that's a lot of how I kind of make this make sense to students is give them some of those jokes, and it helps to kind of for them to find those logical inconsistencies as they're reading. Um, all right. So that is it for verbal skills. No more reading, no more English, just raw concrete math. We'll do a handful of these and then talk a little bit about how the scoring system works and how to make sense of that score report. So take a minute for this one. Okay. So this is, of course, a system of equations question. Um, and there's lots of ways to solve systems of equations. You can, use elimination or substitution. There's many different paths to the correct answer here. However, this is just a way that Desmos is really helpful. You can just plug these equations directly into Desmos, and it will just tell you where they intersect. A lot of like TI calculators, you have to arrange the equation a little bit so that it's, y equals whatever. No need to do that with Desmos. You can just type it in exactly as it says, and it will just give it to you. So this is just one of the ways that Desmos is super, super helpful. It, if you know what it's capable of, a lot of the test becomes much easier and much quicker. Um, all right, we've got another one, slightly trickier. Desmos will still help. Give you another minute. Go. All right. So sums of solutions is very common in the algebra section, and that is why I included it, of course. And we'll talk a little bit about exactly the way to solve this conventionally, but there is a trick that I think everybody should know because it'll save you a lot of time. So, of course, using our normal understanding of algebra, we're trying to get this into standard form of a quadratic equation. So we do our distributive property of multiplication. We subtract everything we need to get everything on one side. We end up with this 3x squared minus 29x plus 56. I can't factor out any numbers right away. 29 is not divisible by 3, so it's not going to work. But I don't have to factor and solve if I just know that the sum of the solutions is always negative b over a. So in this case, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. If I'm using that form, which I am, a is 3, and B is negative 29. So it's negative 29 over 3. So 29 over 3. That's my answer. I don't have to actually factor, right? Because it's not factorable easily. I would need to use the quadratic formula or some other uh, or I guess no, I could factor it kind of normally, but it'd be kind of a pain. And it's much easier to just remember that the sum of the solutions is negative b over a, because very importantly, this problem is not asking you for what the solutions actually are. Uh, so you don't need to find them. You just need to find the sum, negative b over a. So if you're a student watching this, please memorize it. If you are not a student watching this, but you know one, memorize it and tell them about it. It's a really useful trick. It's going to save them a lot of time. Okay, we've got a sequence one here. I'm actually running a little bit low on time, so I might skip a little bit. Um, yeah, I think I'm gonna actually try to, because I want to have time for questions at the end. So I'm gonna skip a little bit to this geometry question. Give you all a minute for this. Ready, set, go. Okay. So this is a geometry problem that assumes that you know how to calculate the volume of a cube and the volume of a sphere, um, which the test does not give you. It does not give you those formulas. If you were taking the SAT, you get those formulas. The ACT expects you to have these memorized. But if you have them memorized, then this is pretty easy. It's asking for the volume of space in the cube not taken up by the sphere. And this is my crude approximation of what a sphere inside of a cube kind of looks like. But this is talking about the void between the two, right? So it's a problem of difference, right? What is the difference in volumes of these two 3D objects? So I just have to find the volume of one and subtract it from the volume of the other. That's it. So these are my formulas. The side length cubed and then 4/3 pi r cubed. And I know that the edge length of the cube is 68. I know that the radius of the sphere is 34 because they told me. And so I just plug them in, right? I know I'm finding the difference. So I plug in those formulas. I plug my variables into my formulas. And at this point, this is some very gnarly, kind of ugly math. I'm going to have to deal with pi, which is irrational. It's a big pain. Perfect use of Desmos here. No need to work this out by hand. If you put this very ugly, messy equation in Desmos, it will just right away spit out exactly what you need. In this case, it's 149,000 and change. So the answer is going to be A. And so this looks very intimidating, but if you know the formulas and you just manage the information that is given to you, it's very straightforward. And of course, don't forget that you have Desmos. Okay, that's it for practice problems. I'm going to try to leave some time for questions at the end, but I want to make sure y'all know what to do with these ACT sort of score reports. So this is a pre-ACT student report, which gives you a couple of decent insights. The actual score report from the ACT looks extremely similar to this, so a lot of the information is going to carry over. It gives you the STEM score, the average of your math and science score. And these little ranges are estimates of future ACT performance. This is not a this is not an estimated limit. It's not saying this is about how much we think you'll improve if you work hard. It's more like this is what you might expect to score if you just took the test again and, had a slightly better or slightly worse day than you did on this test, right? Um, because there is just some natural variation in repeat test taking, right? Uh, sometimes you're having a really good day, or it just has a lot of questions that you find easy for some reason, something that comes naturally to you. Um, so that's what that blue band is indicating, just the normal variance of taking more than one test. You're just going to wiggle around a little bit. Um, so that's the score report. Um, the here's your proper ACT score report. I don't know why both of them are in here. That was a mistake. Sorry. Um, it gives you some readiness benchmarks, tells you roughly how prepared you are for college, which is ostensibly the point of this test. Gives you a bit of comparison with the rest of the country and the rest of your state, which are sort of nice to haves. Um, the real value, I think, is in this sort of breakdown by topic. It tells you exactly where you're succeeding and where you're not succeeding. In this case, this student seems very ready for the ACT based on their pre-ACT performance. But of course, if you're trying to do as well as possible, and one of your topics is way lower than the others, that's the thing you need to focus on. You can specialize your studying around that. So the score report gives you a guide of what to focus on. That's the most important thing about the score report. Um, and as you can see, this student is doing pretty well in things like, quantitative reasoning, and, they're doing pretty well in things like geometry. But functions, they're not doing very well at all. And statistics, they're not doing very well at all. And now functions and algebra have plenty of overlap. So that's something that student can kind of fold together. And a tutor who knows what they're doing can, teach those things together and show the connections that already exist that the student isn't picking up on, to make functions easier and bring it up closer to their algebra performance. And of course, statistics, they're just going to need to practice a bit more. They're not doing as well. But also notice that let me get my little magic marker here. Uh, you can see how many questions you actually have of each of these. Statistics is kind of a smaller one, right? The student is missing, like, yes, this percentage is lower, but uh, they're missing four statistics questions, and they're also missing four geometry questions, right? So they're missing six functions questions because there's just more of those. Um, and different students have uh, different understanding of their own sort of potential for progress. But you make your plans based on the number of questions you are trying to get back and how quickly you can get those back, right? With as little as practice as possible, how can I maximize the number of questions I'm getting back, not just my percentage, because all the questions count the same amount, and the goal is to get more questions right. That's my professional opinion. All right, so those detailed results are what are going to help you put together your study plan. You can also get something called My Answer Key. I strongly recommend this for at least for the first official test that a student takes. You can get back the actual test with the answers, the correct answers, and the answer that the student put, so they can review every single question that they missed. There might be non-conceptual reasons for the student missing a question. So, for example, if they ran out of time, and so, the last 10 questions are all blank, well, it doesn't matter what the content of those questions are. The student needs to work on answering questions faster without losing out on accuracy so that they can get to those. So that's the kind of insight that the TIR, or excuse me, the My Answer Key gives you. They used to call it the TIR. I don't know why they changed it. But strongly recommend that students take advantage of that. Couple of patterns to look for when you're looking at your answer key. Carelessness, early wrong answers in the math section, those should not be happening, right? Look over time. Are you getting fatigued? Are you getting less accurate as you move on because you're exhausted. That would make sense in something like the math section where the questions are getting harder, but in something like reading or English, the questions should be roughly the same level of difficulty as you move through. So if you're performing worse towards the end of English, it's probably because you're getting tired. You need to work on your mental stamina. Um, Large blocks of errors, maybe you're losing focus and then you're getting it back. And of course, time management is straightforward. If you have a lot of omissions at the end, then that's no good. I am going to skip through the SAT stuff because I already covered a lot of this. SAT is much more heavy on algebra and advanced math. Um, for your testing plan, the reason we're all here, um, I think whatever test you're taking, you should take it at least three times, or plan to take it three times. Um, Most students need three attempts, but also it just helps with the stress if the first two tests that you're taking aren't like the last ones, right? It kind of helps the student go in a little bit more relaxed. A lot of students, they can, take a test, get some score, do no studying, take the test again, and improve simply because it's not their first time taking it anymore. There's less stress, less anxiety. So most students do need to take more than one in any case. A couple of things for successful prep. Of course, I think getting a tutor is a good idea because I work for a tutoring company. But there are a lot of free resources online, lots of places to get mock tests. Um, Distributed intentional practice is important. Do not try to cram for these tests. That is not going to work. Establish a goal, establish a timeline, and work a little bit over a long period of time. You should treat this test like getting better at a sport. It does not matter how much you practice at basketball. You are not going to become a better basketball player in 1 week. You have to practice basketball over a long period of time to get good at basketball. Same thing with these tests. Here is a nice little timeline, all the different months where you can take an ACT or an SAT. And the PSAT is going to be in October for everybody. And these are my final points. It's a sport you improve at. Do not cram. Remember Desmos. Remember that the ACT on math is broad and not deep. You have to study lots of different things and get a basic understanding. You don't need to go super deep into one particular topic. It is always in the student's interest to take more tests, take as many tests as you can, because better scores mean better schools, better scholarships. Most schools care about your super score. So, and that can only improve, right? It will pretty much never hurt you to take the test again, outside of just losing a Saturday morning and the test not being very fun to take. And be sure to aim for three tests. It is okay to take three tests to get the score that you need. That's all I've got. Thank you all very much. We are 1 minute past our time. So if you have an engagement, you are dismissed. However, if you have any questions, I'm gonna stay on for a little bit. You can drop them in the Q&A or in the chat if you have access to that. I would prefer the Q&A. That would be a little bit easier. But thank you all for being here, and we hope to see you all again very soon. All right. My new friend Michelle asks, when do you recommend a student take his first real ACT? So I would say, th this should be a sophomore year project, mostly because junior year is such a pain for most students. Ideally, the student should go into junior year either having already gotten the score that they want. That would be ideal. Most students don't care to do that. But at least feeling really prepared uh, for their test by the time they go into junior year. That would be ideal. So first real ACT, mid sophomore year, maybe. Kind of depends on the student's schedule and commitments, but I think test prep in a perfect world is a sophomore year project. I hope that answers that question. Um, yeah, taking Chem and Algebra 2 this year as a sophomore. Yeah, that's uh I guess I'm not sure exactly what you mean, but if you're suggesting the student's going to be too busy in sophomore year, then I guess the answer would be try to get the ACT test done, the official one, sort of midsummer after sophomore year, right? So they're not taking those tough classes. But if you're talking about sort of preparedness for the test, students should be okay with Algebra 2, exposure to content. Okay, I understand. Um, yeah, so there are going to be some new concepts on the math that are going to be unfamiliar to the student, but with a decent prep book, especially on ACT, they should be able to kind of pick it up. Most students who take the ACT, for example, like aren't super familiar with things like sequences or matrices, because that's usually more of a like late junior year or senior year thing. But the student doesn't need to have a deep understanding of those concepts anyway. So they can just sort of learn them. And for most students, they're perfectly able to do that. Um, so if the student is doing well in Algebra 2 and not having a lot of trouble, they're probably fine to, at the very least, they take a practice ACT, see how it goes. If they feel like they've pretty much got a handle on it, they're fine to start prep. They really just need, for a lot of those topics that are more advanced, logarithms or something, that the student might not know from Algebra 2. They probably just need an afternoon to kind of think on it and read a little bit, and they should figure it out because they really just need that intro level understanding. Um, Thank you very much, Michelle. All right. Any others? I think I'm gonna stick around until 6 past the hour, and then I think I'm gonna let everybody go home. All right. Well, thank you all so much for being here and for staying a little bit late for questions. I hope you found this boot camp helpful. If you'd like to know more about the SAT, we have another one of these next week, which will be focusing on the SAT instead. But thank you all again, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye bye now.